So, with no further ado, this discussion is a conversation about First Nations as protagonists in their own sustainable development models. And we have some very special guests, which we will introduce one by one in a narrative that takes us from Acre, in the heart of the Amazon, to the Kimberley in West Australia. So let me start by introducing Batu Borges, who is from Forest Trends. I'll have him describe what Forest Trends is. Batu, like me, is a Brazilian who is living, in his case, I think, between Hawaii and San Francisco. But he has been working in various Brazilian biomes with First Nations for over 20 years, 40 years. And he is working with the Brazilian Ministry of Indigenous Peoples on a territorial governance project. Batu, tell us about what you're doing and why it matters, and speak into the mic, very close.
Greetings, everyone. Jeez. Really a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Beto Borges. I direct Forest Trends Community and Territorial Governance Initiative with my dear colleague Michael Jenkins, our president, who is here as well. So I've been working, have had the privilege to work with Indigenous peoples and local communities over the past 40 years. And I guess in essence, the work that we do at Forest Trends in this program is really to support local communities in order to uphold their territorial rights, and in doing so, also create the conditions for them to create a pathway for a transition wherein they can accomplish economic resilience and an autonomous form of self-development, which is really a way for them to realize and to exercise their protagonism as best stewards of the forests that they have occupied traditionally over generations. So here in Brazil, we have a very privileged scenario. About 15 to 17% of Brazilian land mass is in the hands of indigenous peoples, or lands that have already been demarcated by the federal government. Millions and millions of hectares. Over 270 distinct indigenous ethnicities, including my dear friend Yawanawa is one of them. And the work that we do to conclude this part is, within this program, is to strengthen a systemic approach for the securement of rights as well as the livelihoods of local communities, indigenous peoples in this case. Currently we have
because of the, which is directly
technical
and indirectly, which is related to a climate issue.
Currently we have a technical...
If you know Ethiopia, Ethiopia is one of the countries which is remembered by a consecutive farming.
Currently... Hello? Hello, hello, hello. Just to conclude, currently we have a technical cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil to work in 48 indigenous territories across all 6 biomes, as well as technical cooperation agreement with the Secretariat of Indigenous Peoples in the state of Pará, the state of Acre, Pará as well, but in the state of Acre, where Nedina is a really important person, director within that state secretariat in Acre. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Okay, so we are hello? We are officially winging it here today. Batu is translating as we speak, and we're going to keep winging the translation. The program that Batu is leading is a systemic change that has really shifted the expectation of Brazil's First Nations on the value of bringing different models of development, including environmental market sovereignty, their own leadership and protagonism. It is my great honor to introduce Negina Luisa Alves Yawa Nawa. And she is an author, a professor, and the leader of her people of Acre. And if you were to look at a map and understand the size of that nation, it is possibly bigger than Germany. I mean, it's a huge land. And if you could translate Bantu, my question really is, you know, what does it mean to have this program that helps her and her people be protagonists?
Olá, boa tarde a todos. É um prazer também poder estar aqui, poder falar um pouco da nossa experiência do Acre, dos povos indígenas do Acre, especialmente da Secretaria de Povos Indígenas. Eu sou Negina Iauanauá, um dos 18 povos que reside no Acre. Então, poder falar um pouco dessa parceria com a Forest Trends.
So she is introducing herself and shared the importance of the work of the Ministry of Indigenous People through Forest Trends, and she's now going to talk about the partnership. She represents one of 18 groups in Acre.
E dizer que nós temos uma parceria de longa data, né, Beto, da Forest Trend, que ajudou a construir também o CISA, que é uma lei do Sistema de Incentivo a Serviços Ambientais no Acre, que regula e que tem a governança.
So she has been working for how many years, Batu? These are long-term partnerships, 15 years working together in the fields. And why I am stressing Forest Trends for our Australian audience, Forest Trends cultivated a group called the Katoomba Group that first met in Katoomba near the Blue Mountains 25 years ago to study where environmental markets work. They came to hear about the Murray-Darling Basin water trading scheme, the then CPRS that we have, and guess what? Not if, but when COP31 comes to Australia, this model will be replicated with our friends from Brazil.
She also said the Secretariat of Indigenous Peoples in the state of Acre, they have been very instrumental setting up the first Payments for Ecosystem Services program for the state of Acre, the CISA program, which is one of the, in fact, is the pioneer jurisdictional RED program in Brazil. So it began about more than 10 years ago. They were instrumental in doing that work.
E só enfatizar esse sistema, essa lei, que respeita os direitos dos povos indígenas e também tem a governança, que é a presença e a participação da sociedade civil e governo.
So this is a very important law that was established in the state of Acre in Brazil about 10 years ago. It's called CISA, S-I-S-A, the incentives system for incentives for environmental service for the state of Acre, which not only promotes environmental conservation, but also social aspects, including the rights of indigenous peoples in the state.
E segundo, também destacar essa parceria que nos fortalece enquanto povos indígenas, trazendo o nosso conhecimento tradicional e nos dando formação e capacitação para que nós mesmos indígenas possamos trabalhar dentro dos nossos territórios.
So another important aspect of this law is that it gives, through the incentive programs that comes with the system, is that it strengthens their traditional knowledge systems and also provides capacity building in order for them to be more and more protagonists within their territories.
Então, a existência da Secretaria Indígena hoje é mais uma responsabilidade que nós, indígenas, estamos à frente desse trabalho, mas a gente não faz nada só. Os parceiros são muito importantes e a Forest Trend tem nos acompanhado até hoje.
So the importance of this work within the Secretariat of Indigenous Peoples in the state of Acre is so important because it provides the space for them to exert their leadership as Indigenous peoples, as protagonists of their territories. But she also said that they cannot do their work alone, and that's why other institutional partnerships are necessary, such as the one that they have with our organization, Forest Trends.
E mais que dar o recurso, é criar mecanismo e também nos preparar para que nós mesmos possamos implementar os nossos projetos. No Acre, nós temos os PGTAs.
So, in addition, it's beyond channeling financial resources, which are very important, but it's particularly important so that we ourselves, them, can implement their own initiatives, such as the environmental protection programs called the PGTAs.
Então, finalizo aqui dizendo da importância da parceria que nós precisamos ter. Eu trago aqui a nossa parceria de longa data com a Forest Trend, que tem nos ajudado a nos tornar cada vez mais protagonistas, parceiros de luta, parceiro onde respeita os nossos direitos, nossos conhecimentos e a nossa afirmação cada vez mais, porque a gente não faz nada só. E fortalecer nossos trabalhos, e a Secretaria hoje ela está no patamar que tem hoje o Acre, com vários pioneirismos, ele se consolida cada vez mais com o apoio dos nossos parceiros.
So just again wanted to emphasize the importance of partnerships, because then by themselves cannot do much, but with partnerships can really enhance their protagonism over their territories in order to respect their rights. And the fact that nowadays they are exercising this leadership place within a secretariat, which it's a government institution, a government agency, the Secretariat of Indigenous Peoples of the state of Acre in Brazil. So today they occupy a very important place in order to exercise their rights and keep with their traditions.
Okay, so I will reflect in flicking to our next speaker that Forest Trends is a strong believer in environmental markets in order to enable capital to flow to those who care for the land, which does mean carbon markets, nature markets, water markets, different ways of mobilizing capital with intention, but from the ground up, from the leadership model that supports those rights. And our next speaker, Evan Leslie, is using a similar model, working with the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, where he is creating a capacity for First Nations in New South Wales who own a very large amount, control a very large amount of land, to own their own large-scale renewable energy assets. And not only that, he is creating a certificate that represents the cultural value of that ownership, which brings even more financial return through markets. Evan.
Thank you, Mara. So my name's Evan Leslie. I've had a background in project development and finance. I've just recently stepped away from BlackRock to focus on this work in a full-time pro bono capacity, so it's obviously extremely close to my heart. So I'm here representing the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council. They're the second largest landowner in New South Wales after the government, or after the Crown, with the ability to claim Crown land. So a lot of that land is next to distribution lines, transmission lines and substations, so perfectly situated for activation for renewables. However, a lot of our communities are on country, so they're out a long way away from Sydney, 800, 900, 1,000 kilometres away in places like Tibooburra, Menindee, Wilcannia, Burke and Brewarrina. And so if you were here for the last panel, it was on distributed energy resources. When you've got a project that's far away from the main city of the state, there is a significant missing money gap or bankability challenge that you have to address, because you've got to get all the panels out there, you've got to build the thing, you've got to operate it for 35 years, and all that costs you more. So how do you solve for that bankability gap? So I like the theme of us being protagonists. We're protagonizing around the concept of the First Nations Certificate of Origin. For 25 years in Australia, we've had what's called a green certificate, or a large-scale generator certificate that you could trade if you were a wind or a solar developer. It's been very successful because now wind and solar is the lowest cost of energy generation in Australia. To my knowledge, no First Nations organisation has benefited from a green certificate. So our thinking is to reframe or reimagine that green certificate, so that for every megawatt of electricity that's generated by an asset that's owned by First Nations across Australia, you can trade a certificate for real value. Now, who's going to buy those certificates? In Australia, there is an obligation when you work for the government as a corporate, that a percentage of that contract must be spent on First Nations businesses. And it's actually really hard because the percentage is material. It's 4% of the contract. So if you could buy your power from Menindee or Tibooburra and power your office building or power your headquarters or whatever under a power purchase agreement, along with buying the certificate, you could help make distributed energy resources bankable for First Nations communities all across Australia. We're working on a class of on-grid certificate. We're also working on a class of off-grid certificate, which could be attractive, particularly in terms of making microgrid projects in the Torres Strait, where people are heavily dependent on diesel, bankable as well. So we're working very hard to create this certificate. We're here for the next week or two to talk to the government about it, but so far very, very much universal, positive to support for the idea.
And when Evan talks about diesel and distance, foreshadowing, Professor Anne Poelina will translate what this means to her people in West Australia in the Kimberley, where the floods disconnect communities around the entire Martuwarra Fitzroy River catchment, which is a huge river system, from power sometimes for weeks in the heat. This is, from a human point of view, game-changing. So to provide context before we hear from Anne, my dear friend Dermot O'Gorman is the CEO of WWF Australia. And he brings with him great knowledge of WWF's work because he once was the CEO of WWF China. And he also is involved in the Katoomba group, those of us who are believers in environmental markets and their social benefits. Dermot, please share with us the importance of rebuilding confidence in voluntary markets and how we layer credits and the work WWF has been doing to support this.
Thank you, Mara. I think that we're at a really important stage in the development of financial market, of environmental markets, in markets that work with Indigenous, and also new energy markets. And because we're building a lot of this at a stage at which we are able to shape what they look like for the next 10 years. And I think having worked in countries around the world and now back in Australia, I see a momentum around how we do three things differently. And the first one is sort of what we've been talking about now. How do we make sure that, for example, in the carbon markets, that it works also for nature and it also works for Indigenous communities? And so the idea of stackable carbon, which is not just carbon on its own, but it's about creating markets which have multiple benefits, and is led by the First Nations that are working on there, is a super important part of the development of one of those type of markets. The second part to it is around, as an NGO, you know, we've always said we work with Indigenous communities and work with communities around the world and in Australia. But I think the ability to flip round to much more the First Nation leadership that we're hearing today, and being able to support that, is a different model than we have traditionally NGOs have done around the world. And so I think that reversal of First Nation leadership is a very important part. And then that leads to a third component, which is NGOs themselves need to change. And I think the way I describe that is, 3 years ago, the WWF board went out with its Indigenous board member, a man called Phil Risk, on his country for 3 days. We did our strategic planning for the organisation for the next 5 years. And it was the whole organisation strategy, not just about how we work with First Nations, but everything we do. And it completely turned the board and the senior management's view of our role sitting on country with 25 Indigenous leaders, rangers and elders, and so we've come out of that with a new strategy which was actually a gift to us around sky, country and saltwater, which is our climate work, our oceans work and our terrestrial and our freshwater work. And that's helped to change the way that we as an organisation work and engage with First Nations and as well. So that there's a technical financial transformation, but there's also for NGOs working in this space, there's an institutional transformation that needs to take place too.
Okay, so for those of us that work in this kind of nexus, Anne Poelina needs no introduction. But for those of you who have only come to know Anne, she has tremendous depth of vision and knowledge around what actually is a biocultural region in her land. And she has created an innovative governance model right up the Martuwarra Fitzroy River that involves elders from all of the First Nations communities. It's a council of elders. And share your vision with us of what a future model looks like with you and your people as the protagonists.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. First of all, as an Indigenous person, we believe the land is alive, and that in terms of protocol, we must respect the land, and as visitors, ask permission to speak on the land. So I live in the Kimberley in Western Australia. My people pay 9 times more for energy and power than anyone else in the whole state. So we are very keen to start to look at what does energy democracy look like? How can we take this ancient wisdom that has come from the land? I do not describe myself as a protagonist. I describe myself as an actionist, because I am passionate about transformation and finding those people who want to be brave and build a coalition of hope to look at how do we do business differently, particularly in a place like the Kimberley. So my world is really about, this is not a job for me, this is my destiny. So I've been born into this role. We have set up an amazing council of elders. Importantly, we have young leaders standing with us who want to have a dream that they can have a climate chance. And so part of the dream is to open up our ancient Indigenous wisdom, which is about governance, which is about leadership, which is about the oldest living system science and the oldest legal system in the world, So when we are looking at these issues and we are dealing with complexity, unless we have Indigenous wisdom informing the strategies going forward, we will meet our own demise. So this is really a wake-up call. We call it wake up the snake. How do you wake up the consciousness of the people to bring the people with you? So this is about equity, not just in energy, because as Indigenous people, we do not separate land, water, people, and the environment. We are nature. Nature is us. And so we are one with that. So we have an old system thinking of science, how we learn to read the land and the living waters from a spatial scale. We need to look at this conversation around nature repair, because for me, it is about regenerating the carbon sinks, healing the land, healing the people, healing climate. So it's really critical that we understand that what we need to do is have balance. In order to have balance, we must look at all of the systems that we are living with, what we are dealing with, and most importantly, we must recognize the people who have come from the land, because that knowledge, that wisdom of being able to read the environment, to be able to say that we have lived with the Anthropocene, that we understand these systems at a spatial scale, and that this knowledge needs to be informing the way we think about energy. One of the big things from my elders are saying that it's all about energy, positive, negative, what we have been extracting and tilting the earth energy systems. It is time to wake up, think about how Indigenous people can inform the way that we can go forward. We will need blended finance. We need multiple ways to bring the economy in, but we have an opportunity to start to create new, what we call culture conservation economies, the economics of well-being, about social capital, about human capital, about cultural capital, about environmental. How does that come into informing our lives? How does that help us to reach our full potential as human beings? So what I'm saying is that this ancient wisdom that has been here from the beginning of time is about governance, bottom up, not top down, because once we have top down governance, it becomes centralized and we do not have distributive and procedural justice. So this is about a dream. How can we dream the future? How can we believe that what we're saying is that we need to stand united, human to human, and see, can we dream? Can we have a climate chance? Can we ensure our young people can take their rightful place now and in the future? So for me, it's about working together. It is what Paulo Freire talked about, being united, being organized, being cooperative, and most importantly, cultural synthesis. So we need all of us at the table. We need to challenge these systems. We need innovation. We need transformation. But most importantly, we need Indigenous wisdom to inform our systems thinking so that we can ensure that there will be humanity and planetary well-being for the future now.
So this is the conversation that can happen if COP31 comes to Australia. We will build on the knowledge that has been developing for decades in the Amazon, in the Cerrado, in the Pantanal, and we will join the cultural synthesis together with First Nations of Australia, who have 60,000 years of knowledge to bring in to this wisdom, to bring to this equation. Beto, and perhaps you can share the dialogue. When you hear the inspiring story of the kind of connectedness of synthesizing the opportunities and bringing capital and markets in, how do you reflect on the work currently underway with your project? And feel free to talk about maybe some of the carbon, nature, other, actual enterprise that, is the ideas that are coming forward.
Thank you so much. I think this this very important point about acknowledging the traditional wisdom, traditional science of First Nations, and how can we drink from that fountain of knowledge to inform the systems that we have nowadays, such as mechanisms for payments for environmental services, for instance. So I think we have, so you also mentioned earlier about the importance, perhaps the revival of carbon markets. I think a point wherein we could learn a lot from traditional systems comes to the standards that are available today to certify and to bring about social and environmental integrity of carbon markets, because there's more to be done in that area. We've been working, supporting some of that work with a new carbon standard. It's called Equitable Earth, wherein we've tried to learn from local communities how is it that they go about measuring conservation. Because of a big problem that we have, that we've noticed in this space, the carbon markets, either jurisdictional programs or voluntary carbon markets, is the fact that the systems or the standards that are very much needed in order for the investors to put their money in order to promote these markets are all based in a Western scientific-centric form of understanding the world, which lacks in a great deal the traditional wisdom of local communities, how they go about measuring conservation. Because at the end of the day, what really everyone wants to know, what is the impact of a project? So not only the environmental impact in terms of keep the forest standing, but also the social impact. That's what social and environmental integrity is all about. And to this day, standards, they're very complex. So we have to find a way to bring about this point of interaction between traditional systems and Western-centric ways of measuring conservation. The more our academic ways of measuring conservation can reflect the ways wherein local communities measure conservation, I think we'll be closer to this drinking from the traditional knowledge systems. I think that's one of the ways that we believe it is necessary, and I will translate what I just said to her.
As you translate, so as Bantu translates, you know, it is really interesting. Australia has a highly regulated carbon market, don't we? Yes, we do. And we have methods that are very tightly aligned to great inquiries, regulators, and debates linked to a compliance market which supports the national pathway to decarbonization. And so Brazil has a very dynamic, emergent, hugely creative carbon nature market, which has collaboration of actors, but perhaps is a bit looser in its imagination in many ways than Australia's, but also could learn from Australia's regulated markets and the confidence that brings to actors. The recipe for rebuilding these markets between these two nations is huge. So, you know, I think as we imagine for Nijina, the question I have for her, we talk about the Amazon as the lungs of the world that are at risk because of climate change. So how does she see the role of her people, the First Nations of Acre, in building the resilience of the Amazon so that the rest of the world can be less at risk?
Então, nós, povos indígenas, primeiro que nós temos uma visão espiritual com a floresta.
First of all, we indigenous peoples have a spiritual vision related to the forest.
E, através dessa visão, nós temos essa conexão muito próxima e de respeito e um modo milenar de de usufruir daquilo que é necessário para sobreviver.
And as a result of this vision, we have an ancient way of connecting with the forest in order for us to understand how to go about living within the forest.
E a nossa vida, ela tem um sentido muito próximo do respeito com o ser humano e com o ambiente que nós vivemos.
So in that way, our life has a way wherein we respect, human beings and people, but also in the same way the environment, the natural environment where we live.
Antigamente, nós vivíamos isolados, mas não podemos viver mais dessa forma. Então, a sociedade, ela precisa reconhecer esse modo de vida que nós temos diferente e a nossa visão.
So before we used to live in isolated ways, but nowadays society really needs to respect and recognize our way of being, our way of living.
E uma das melhores estratégias que nós temos de sobrevivência é a proteção, é o respeito com a floresta, com as pessoas, e que hoje isso não tem acontecido.
So the way that we live in today is a way that we bring about a way to respect people and the forest in ways that had not been happening before.
Nenhum ser humano pode viver sem a espiritualidade, sem conhecer a sua essência.
We believe that people cannot really have a good life without having a spiritual connection, without knowing our own essence.
A nossa espiritualidade, ela nos dá a nossa técnica, a nossa ciência.
Our spirituality then gives our techniques and our science.
E a ciência, com a ciência, nós praticamos uma atitude que nos faz andar no mundo tradicional e na sociedade envolvente.
So, and with this science, we are able to walk within our traditional world as well as in sort of our Western world as well.
E para finalizar, como nós contribuímos, eu acredito que só o fato do nosso modo de viver, do nosso modo de pensar, ele é uma técnica ancestral, é uma técnica tradicional, mas também é uma técnica que pode se tornar um sistema de trabalho com o capital.
So we believe then how it is that we can contribute isn't what we're saying, our way of thinking, our way of being, but a way in which can also be combined with different mechanisms, with different financial mechanisms.
Wow. We have in the audience the co-CEO of the Responsible Industry Investment Association of Australia, and I will just point out that there is a global task force on nature disclosure which is trying to measure the dependency of modern industry on ecosystems. And here we have the ancient wisdom of the forest, understanding that dependency starts at a spiritual level. So I could ask a few more questions of our panel, but I have a suspicion there might be some questions from the audience. I know there's one right there. Let me briefly ask Anne if she can, perhaps respond to that spiritual dimension on behalf of her people to draw that loop, and then we'll have about 5-8 minutes of Q&A.
Yeah, I think the formula is the same for Indigenous people throughout the world. We call it our lian, our moral compass that teaches us how to read right from wrong, where to go, where is danger. I think really what we are saying as Indigenous people, not just in Australia but globally, is we want you to learn how to see and be in the world through the way that we see and be in the world. We want you to feel the land. We want you to hear the land. We want you to work with us and walk with us so that we can build this new vision together collectively. So the human spirit, the lian, is so important. It's our moral compass. It grounds the values that we have about building relationship, building respect, building reciprocity, and with rights comes responsibility. So the vision we have in our country where I live is not a vision just for Indigenous people. It is a vision for humanity. It is a vision for non-Indigenous as well as Indigenous, because we are human beings together collectively, and this wisdom must come together if we are going to solve the issues going forward. So it's all about the human spirit, all about you being brave, reaching out, finding those Indigenous people, finding those local people, and learning how to become human again. Thank you.
Okay, I will be the roving mic. We have a question from the audience.
Thank you, Mara. My question is to Nedina and Anne, as representatives of the land. I have been to Acre, and I understand the wisdom that is being spoken of here. And I like to simplify the climate crisis as a crisis of consciousness. The competition between individual and collective incentives, short-term and long-term. And ancient wisdom is a culture based on custodianship, whereas Western wisdom is based on consumerism. And I am aware, here's my question, I am aware of a very powerful Indigenous leader that did not come to COP because he said that we are not listening. And my question is, how can your message cut through, and how can we listen to you better?
I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but we call it wake up the snake. Wake up the consciousness of the people to bring the people with you. So I'm sitting here as a scientist, a multidisciplinary scientist, and sometimes I say we are testosterone out on science. We need a different way to tell the story. We need a different way to open the hearts and minds of the people to bring the people with us. So wake up the snake, wake up the consciousness is the revolution we need to have. So from that perspective, it is about looking at all of this and seeing how do we balance all of these things together. You are right, maybe there is a friend who has not come, but what I'm saying is this is my first COP. And I'm saying I've put myself in this space because I believe we need to be brave as Indigenous people. We need to find those people who believe in the dream we have. In terms of my culture, we see the past, the present, and the future in this moment now. We have a duty of care, all of us, to wake up, to realize that our young people need to be able to have the opportunity to dream and to believe that they can hold their right as a human being in this place. Wake up the snake, wake up the consciousness, bring the people with you. Use film, use poetry, use song, use dance, use ceremony, because that is what wakes your spirit up. Thank you.
O planeta tem espírito, o mundo tem espírito e a natureza.
The planet has spirit, the world has spirit, as well as nature has spirit.
Nós, seres humanos, também carregamos um espírito.
We human beings, we also have our spirit.
E o que acontece hoje, as mudanças climáticas e os impactos, é a falta da presença do espírito, principalmente nas COPs.
And what is happening today is the lack of the presence of the spirit in the COPs, in the climate conferences.
E então, nós, povos indígenas, trazemos o nosso conhecimento, que é do passado, mas que a gente vive no presente também, e é o que garante a esperança para o nosso futuro.
And we, indigenous peoples, we bring our knowledge, which is the knowledge, an ancient knowledge of the past, that brings us here in this moment in the present, but also a moment in which creates our hope for the future.
O nosso respeito com a natureza, ela é intrínseca, ela é quando a gente nasce, porque nós temos essa facilidade, porque nós vivemos perto dela.
So the respect that we have for nature is intrinsic within us because we're born living within nature, so we're part of it.
Quem vive longe precisa perceber e despertar realmente essa consciência do respeito, da proteção, para que a gente possa continuar vivendo nesse planeta. Não existe outro.
And those of us who live far away, we have to develop this awareness, this respect, and towards conservation, because there is really no other way.
Então, nós, povos indígenas, temos essa consciência e nós não mudamos. A nossa técnica não mudou, mas o mundo percebeu hoje que é uma da forma de proteção e conservação e o que contribui para o equilíbrio do mundo, do clima.
So we, indigenous peoples, we have this awareness, but nowadays the world is discovering this awareness that is really important for the balance of the world.
Então, eu convido o planeta, eu convido todos a ter essa missão, né, de ter essa nova consciência de união, porque o planeta caminha para uma catástrofe.
So then I invite the whole world for waking up to this awareness, because otherwise the world is going on the pathway of a destruction. We hope that is not the case. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one final brave question, and there she is.
Thank you. You've spoken about these two complementary systems of knowledge, one of which is science and the other of which is spirituality and cultural traditions and wisdom. I'm just wanting to know how we've heard also for this COP, the global ethical stocktake has taken quite a front seat, but we don't hear it as much as we've just heard. How do you see that both of these can come together and how the global ethical stocktake can play a part, not just in this COP, but onwards?
Onwards to Adelaide.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think really, as I said earlier, this is about values, this is about ethics, this is about virtues. This is what we ground Indigenous wisdom within. So it's, as I said earlier, trying to teach you how to see and be in the world through our eyes, and how that can open up, one, to your own humanity, but two, the collective wisdom of all of us sitting in the room. We are dealing with complexity. What we are saying as Indigenous people, we're not saying we are elitists and this is the only way. We are saying we need all of you. We need collective wisdom to be able to right-size the planet, to be able to come together to resolve the complexity, and it's built on those values that I said, around values, around ethics, around virtues, around believing that as Indigenous people who are holding the last bastions of biodiversity, that we cannot do this transformation without each and every one of you sitting in the room.
Então, todos nós temos conhecimento e cultura.
So all of us, we have knowledge and culture.
Se cada respeitar o espaço do outro, é possível viver esse equilíbrio, como a ciência e o conhecimento tradicional.
So if we live respecting each other's space, each other's ways, it's possible to conciliate science with traditional knowledge.
E ao longo dos anos, os povos indígenas, os seus conhecimentos foram apagados e negados. Porém, o próprio planeta, o próprio universo, diante do cenário que nós vivemos hoje, reconhece os nossos conhecimentos.
So over the years, the indigenous knowledge, indigenous traditions were sort of neglected. But because of the state of the world today, so more people are getting interested in the indigenous ways. Pedindo para concluir, que já está concluindo.
Então, é o que nós fazemos. Quando o conhecimento científico não resolve, nós trabalhamos a espiritualidade. Então, um complementa o outro. É assim que tem que ser trabalhado.
So when one doesn't work, such as when science doesn't work, we indigenous people work with the spirituality. So one complements the other one. Otherwise, we won't be able to solve things.
We are officially over time, but we could stay for years, couldn't we? So on behalf of our wonderful panel, can I thank especially our special guest who's come from such a long distance to be with us. And I just want to reflect that this is not a disjointed conversation. I come here representing an Australian pension fund, Australian Ethical Investments, which has supported Anne's visit to COP, that we are involving someone like Evan, who brings the wisdom of developing through Lend-Lease at-scale property and through BlackRock funds management, the knowledge that Forest Trends has on contemporary, value-driven carbon, nature, other environmental service markets, and then the wisdom that WWF has played around the world on noticing the importance of connecting these dots. We are part of what in Brazil we call the mutirão. This is our version of the mutirão, and we really look forward to bringing it next year to Australia. So thank you very much for joining us.